there, this is African News. I'm Rochelle Ferguson with the top stories on the continent. Enjoy the World Cup at home. The warning from the Kenyan government this Friday as it urges fans to avoid watching football matches in public places. The US slapped sanctions on Ugandan officials, saying the country's anti-gay legislation goes against human rights. And marking World Refugee Day, the UN says the number of people forced to flee their homes worldwide has surpassed 50 million. But firstly, watch the World Cup from the comfort of your own home. The advice from Kenya's Interior Ministry this Friday as it urged football fans to avoid viewing matches in bars and restaurants. The warning follows a spate of attacks that the government's blamed on the Somali terror group Shabaab. A massacre earlier this week left at least 60 people dead in Kenya's coastal town of Mpeketoni. Hannah McNeish is in Nairobi for us.
2 weeks ago, the head of the police told people that they would be protected during the World Cup. And now the government has said, unless it can be avoided, please don't go and watch any World Cup matches in busy and crowded bars. The announcement comes after a week where 64 people were killed on the coast in an attack that Somali terrorist group Al-Shabaab has claimed. And then, strangely, the Kenyan government said was due to local political networks. It wasn't Al-Shabaab. Now, Al-Shabaab have been quite insistent, and they've also pledged to continue attacks on Kenya in retaliation for Kenyan troops being in Somalia since 2011. So this move is quite surprising, and people, I think, are going to heed it.
Now, amid this warning, Hannah, what's the atmosphere like where you are now? It's yet to be seen how many people are going to fill the bars tonight because the matches are on slightly later. But last night they were absolutely heaving. People were saying that they were not scared off by insecurity, that they wouldn't let the terrorists win. And even when France 24 appealed online to speak to people that were watching this at home because they were fearful of security threats, there was quite a backlash by Kenyans saying that this was quite negative and they didn't want their country to be portrayed as such. Today, I think the warning from the government has made a few people rethink, and even some people in the bars last night were saying that they were there because of friends, they wouldn't go to large places, and that a lot of people didn't want to take the risks. Hannah McNeish reporting from Nairobi there. Well, next, the UN Refugee Agency says the number of people forced to flee their homes worldwide has surpassed 50 million for the first time since World War II. The figures released this Friday on World Refugee Day show that many experiencing forced displacement are from sub-Saharan Africa. In the Central African Republic, refugees have been calling for peace in their crisis-torn nation.
Over 100 refugees from the Central African Republic held a march in the streets of Brazzaville, Congo. The theme of their march was peace and reconciliation, and it was held on World Refugee Day. Christians and Muslims marched together to get their point across.
We walked for peace and reconciliation in the Central African Republic. It doesn't matter if we're Christian or Muslim. We're all Central Africans. Peace is all that matters. We live here. It's not always easy, but we're hanging on.
Congo currently has over 11,000 refugees from the Central African Republic. Most are living at camps in the north near the border between the two countries. 5,000 have been given the right of exile and refugee status. They said they have all been well taken care of in Congo, but all of them want to return quickly to their country.
We don't want to continue living in these conditions. What we want is peace in our country, so that we can go back there as quickly as possible.
All countries in the region are concerned and at times destabilized by this massive influx of refugees. Chad and Cameroon welcomed close to 150,000 Central African refugees, but many are living in very difficult conditions. They are in a hurry to return to their country if peace also returns.
The US has slapped a series of sanctions on Ugandan officials, saying a recent anti-gay bill goes against universal human rights. The legislation, signed into law by President Yoweri Museveni in February, calls for repeat homosexuals to be jailed for life and obliges Ugandans to denounce gays to authorities. Well, Kampala has said the sanctions will have little impact and has rejected reports that the legislation had led to an increase in homophobic assaults. France 24's Simon Marks is in Washington. He tells us more about why the US has opposed the sanctions now.
Well, the US says that it warned Yoweri Museveni in Uganda that these measures were coming. It made it very clear that from an American perspective, this legislation was a major problem and ran counter to what the United States seeks to stand for on the world stage. And the State Department is defending the moves that it's made over the last 24 hours. Just here this afternoon, a State Department spokeswoman saying, look, this is not an anti-Uganda move. It's not an anti-Africa move. It is the United States taking exactly the same kind of action that it would against any nation anywhere in the world that were to introduce legislation like this. So they are trying to take the sting out of the criticism that this is the United States acting in an imperial fashion towards an African nation, a criticism that has been advanced not just by the Ugandans, but also by some other African states. The South African ambassador to the United States gave voice to that just a short while ago.
And Simon, what are these sanctions going to look like?
Well, there's some discussion about just how far they're going to bite or hurt the Ugandans, but certainly a travel ban looks like it could be imposed on anyone that the United States deems responsible for that legislation in Uganda. Aviation military exercise that the United States was planning to help host in Uganda will not take place there with American participation, and there will be limits to the amount of money that the United States is prepared to pay to assist public programs with the Ugandan Police Department, the Ministry of Health, and some other government agencies. But the precise nature of how deep these sanctions go, that is still being discussed here in Washington and does seem to be open to question.
Simon Marks in Washington there. Well, the younger brother of Ivory Coast football stars Yaya and Kolo Touré has died aged 28. The Ivorian Federation confirmed in a statement that Ibrahim Touré, who played for Lebanon's Al Safa Football Club, passed away on Thursday. The IFF didn't give a cause of death, but said Ibrahim died in Manchester, where Yaya plays in the English Premier League. The Federation has not yet said whether the brothers, who are currently at the World Cup, will leave the tournament. And finally, Mauritania's President Mohamed Ould Abdelaziz looks set to win another 5-year term when the Northwest African nation heads to the polls this Saturday. Abdelaziz, known for an iron grip and a firm stance against al-Qaeda militants, seized power during a 2008 coup. The 57-year-old, a former general, faces 4 challengers, including an anti-slavery campaigner. Shirley Sitbourne has the latest.
When the Mauritanian president comes to France, he's received with warmth by his French counterpart. Since he took power in a coup in 2008, Mohamed Ould Abdelaziz has become France's ally in the fight against terrorism. In 6 years, he eliminated jihadist groups in his country, one of the main elements he puts forward in his campaign. The Mauritanian president also enjoys his position at the head of the African Union. During his mandate, he helped broker a ceasefire between rebels and loyalist forces in Mali, right during his election campaign.
The ceasefire signed by both parties in Kidal and Bamako has probably saved some lives.
The economy is the other field the president is proud of. Poverty was reduced during his first mandate. Security could also bring new investors, but not everyone agrees.
As a young person, I do not see a good future for Mauritania.
President Abdelaziz's opponents point out that his democratic results are far from positive. They say his election in 2009 was a sham. His rivals say he has done nothing to fight slavery, which is officially banned. The opposition is boycotting the poll, hoping voters would follow the example.
Well, your Africa team will be back on Monday, but up after the break is Annette Young with more international news. Do stay tuned.